I'm going to invite Sam, who's going to take us through what we can learn from local authorities who are, let's be honest, at the sharp end of this, both financially, politically, ethically, morally, and actually practically. And we're going to hear what they've tried, what they've learned. And I'm going to say before we start, will you trust that these people have come to share with us so we learn? And we're going to be kind to them, not misquote them, do any of that kind of stuff. Is that all right? Over to you, Sam.
Shaun and Rachel, do you want to come and join us on stage? Yeah, that's okay. We've got Ian Swift, unfortunately, cannot make it this morning, so I've given Rachel about 30 seconds' notice to join this panel. So please be extra kind to her, because she'll probably be making up her answers as we're going along. But I've been working with Rachel and Shaun for a couple of years through the work that we're doing at Shared Health to support the children in temporary accommodation. And I just want to say thank you for doing the work that you do, because working in a local authority, I think, is possibly one of the hardest jobs when we're thinking of everything in this sector, everything that surrounds children in temporary accommodation. Being a housing officer is probably the least job I would want to do, just because of it's almost just a nail point of housing crisis, lack of funding, massive need, massive complexity, and you've got a very normal workforce who have their own normal lives of the parents are ill, the dog's at the vet, and stuck on public transport. And we, I think, can sometimes forget that local authorities are humans as well. And I just want to say thank you for all the hard work that you two have been doing, as well as our other local authority colleagues, all other 314 of them dotted around the country. Shaun is from Greenwich and Rachel is from Salford. I'm a Salford resident, so it's nice to be a bit biased about that. And I'm just going to invite them just to kind of give us a bit of what they've been doing. How are they supporting the children in temporary accommodation? You've not got a lot of money, but you've got a lot of need. So you've probably had to think quite creatively in terms of how you use that. There'll be really hard decisions that you'll have had to make that you might not have wanted to, but actually what's the long-term aim in the number of years that are coming down? But also there's exciting new money that's come from the government recently in the past few weeks, and I'll ask you about your thoughts of how you're going to spend it. Because we all like new money, don't we? But it's a one-off money, so it's not going to come again. So that's also a challenge. Shaun's got a few slides, so I wonder if we could get the slides off first. I'm going to pass to you, and then of course open it up to the audience. I want to say something. Take it away.
Thank you, Sam. Thanks for reaffirming I am human. That's I'm quite pleased to be referred to as human. It's quite difficult being in this room, actually hearing everything that's going on, and we are kind of in the centre of the storm. But at the end of the day, it's much easier to be me than it is to be someone who's homeless, and that's my kind of reference point for everything, really. I'm in an extremely privileged position. I was just thinking about my job title. I'm an Assistant Director for Housing Needs and Tenancy. I'm responsible for the housed, the need to be rehoused, and the homeless. In the Royal Borough of Greenwich, we have a housing register with 30,000 households on it, 2,000 households in temporary accommodation, responsible for 20,000 tenants and 5,000 leaseholders. And it isn't just homeless people who have needs, as we've heard today. There's a lot of people struggling very badly at the moment. So, and every single one is a human. So I'm in a privileged position to be able to talk about some pretty good work we've been doing. I'm very mindful there's a lot of good work going on across the country. So we're two local authorities being represented here, but there's amazing work going on across the country. Certainly in many London boroughs, they're pulling up trees to do their best for homeless people. So I'm just going to talk about our own borough's experience, but hopefully also talk about a bit of the London perspective and maybe some national perspective in questions rather than my presentation. And I'll try and be fairly quick. So obviously, being I do work for a local authority, I'll have to give you some numbers, because that's what we do. The green bit on the left-hand side is kind of our story of homelessness. It's the story of how many people are homeless and in temporary accommodation under the responsibility of the Royal Borough of Greenwich. So one of my favourite words that I've learned because of this is septupling. I didn't know that word existed until recently. What it means is the number of households in temporary accommodation under my auspices, although I wasn't there in 2017 when this graph starts, has septupled. It's gone up sevenfold since 2017 up to, 2024. Unprecedented increase, and that's the humanitarian crisis writ large. We're now sort of stabilised at around about 2,000 households. The bit on the right is, I suppose, both the humanitarian crisis getting even worse, but the financial crisis. And Caroline from Lancaster talked about not having anyone in hotels in 2022. Neither did we. Lancaster went up to, I think, 22, which for them was unbearable financially and unbearable morally, as she said. We went from 0 to about 270 in less than a year, rooms booked with Travelodge. At our peak, we had 280 rooms booked with Travelodge, 155 families, well over 300 children living in Travelodge rooms. And it's been implicitly mentioned many times today, the reason homeless families are being moved such an unreasonable and unbearable amount of times is because if you use Travelodge or Premier Inn, they won't let anyone, including very wealthy people, book their rooms for more than 28 nights. So, and it's commercial, isn't it? Obviously, it's not fit for purpose. It's not built for homeless people. It's not built for anyone apart from tourists and business people. So my staff didn't use Travelodge, and all of a sudden they're using Travelodge, and they're struggling to even find rooms in Travelodge branches anywhere near the Royal Borough of Greenwich, which is in South London. So you find a room, it's not even in your borough, the borough the person needs to be in, their child needs to be in the school nearby. It's in a different borough, it's outside London. In our case, we had in the past tense, which is the good news, had to use hotel rooms in Kent, Essex, sometimes in Hertfordshire. And sometimes it was available for the next 5 nights. Okay, so 3 nights later, you're already looking for somewhere else for that family. And when do they find out? I think Caroline said they find out at 10 o'clock at night sometimes. Don't need to labour that particular point. But it's 280 rooms at any moment in time, 155 families, 300 children, moving all over London, all over the southeast of England. And then the financial crisis bit is that for every single Travelodge room we were using, we were literally losing 70 to 80 pounds per night for every single room. Times 280, times 365, from memory was 13 or 14 million pounds a year we were losing of public money giving it to Travelodge. And in September 2023, we were forecasting to overspend on temporary accommodation by 13.4 to 14 million pounds, the single biggest overspend in the history of the Royal Borough of Greenwich. We managed to gazump, if you like, adult social care and children's social care always used to be those in experiencing the biggest financial difficulties. So September 2023, we called a crisis sort of response, which we think has been reasonably successful. There's been some successes in it anyway. So as of July last year, we stopped using Travelodge. We went down to 0 this year, sorry. How can I forget? In July this year, we went from the 280 that it was in spring last year, rooms with Travelodge, to 0 in July this year. And it is still 0, and it's going to be forever 0. We're also going to stop using all temporary accommodation with any sharing of facilities. The HMOs we've heard about today, where children are scared to go to the bathroom, scared to go to the kitchen area, parents don't feel they can cook in the available kitchen. We will not be using them by April next year, and as soon as possible we won't be using them at all. We've got 34 families in HMOs now, several of whom have been there for more than a legal 6 weeks. That will be 0 by March next year, hopefully a lot sooner. So some successes. We have, and again, the local authority perspective is the services have to be funded. We're massively overspending on TA, we can't afford to provide other services. So it is important that we've improved the borough's financial position by £8.7 million since September 2023 up to March this year, which is reasonably, feels like a reasonable success. We spoke earlier about using those savings to invest in other services. The difficulty being, we're still overspending by £3 or £4 million a year. We were achieving savings, but it's only cost reduction. It's only reducing an overspend. It's not creating savings that you can then invest in other services, and that's the challenge. We need to get to a budget neutral temporary accommodation position, then start saving money, and then investing that money in other stuff. But we're still, this year we'll overspend by £2.2 million on temporary accommodation minimum. That's despite having a target this year of reducing our spend after that 8.7 million by another 4 million this year. That's how significant the financial crisis is to us. There's a number of homeless households we did help over the most recent year. 1,750 homeless households helped into permanent social housing or private rented sector housing that was suitable for them. And these are the numbers that aren't kind of really, don't get as much publicity, and rightly so, because because we've still got 2,000 households living in temporary accommodation, 1,500 of which are in our families. Okay, but no one's in a hotel, and there'll be no one in shared facilities TA by March next year. And the final bullet point is the one I think is one of the reasons why I'm kind of allowed onto this stage to some extent, is that we've kind of for the first time ever done co-production in our homelessness service, and I'll talk about that more in a minute. So a little bit about how we think we've made some positive progress, which are ideas. I think this bit is labelled best practice, and sharing these ideas I hope resonates with our colleagues and other local authorities. I've certainly been speaking at lots of conferences about it this year. Number one is being able to identify and clearly articulate the problem to solve and what the intended outcomes are. Sometimes we don't actually sit down and do that, local authorities. And I won't go into what those clear articulations were because there's not time to. One thing I really want to focus on is mobilising senior leaders. And the next one under that is working collaboratively. So in our case, it is a truly joined up and collaborative response, including I've met with the leader of the council, the cabinet member for finance, the cabinet member for children, the cabinet member for housing, the chief executive, the director of finance, and my own director. I've met every 6 weeks since September 2023 to oversee this programme of addressing this humanitarian and financial crisis. And by the chief executive being involved and leader being involved, it makes it everyone's priority. So anyone who's working for local authority in the room, you will know the frustration of when you know what the right thing to do is, but your mates in children's services have other priorities, and your mates in adults have other priorities, and all your mates in all the other services have all sorts of different priorities, which is natural and normal. When the leader says this is the number one priority for the council, all of a sudden you have all these brilliant people that work in all these other services giving you more time, and that makes a huge difference, massive difference. And that's also why the new homelessness strategy needs to be properly joined up across departments, which it never has been before. There's been a lot said about it, and the frustration is that it's never happened. It's got to happen next time, because homelessness isn't solved by people like me and my staff alone. The fourth one, which I could spend hours talking about, we used an approach to this programme which wasn't just solve the financial crisis and get it done quickly, da-da-da-da. It was a hypothesis-led approach where there isn't time to talk about it, but we had colleagues from our digital and transformation service given to the programme, if you like, and we used an actual approach which basically engendered getting together everyone that could contribute to solving the problem, freeing them up to think openly, freely, creatively, and without fear of being labelled, labelled anything. And then testing out ideas that come from all these staff. So we had workshops with 50 staff in the room, coming up with every idea under the sun. They were then prioritising those ideas, deciding what we would try. Then we'd go off and try them. The right people would try them from the right services across the entirety of the borough, not just the council, public health and so on and so forth. And then we'd come back together again, see how it's going. If they're going well, we'd do more of it. And it has worked. We continue to do it in that way. We have improved data. Data's been spoken about today. Probably don't need to labour how incredibly important using data well is, and we really are using data light years better than we were before this started. And just pulling all the levers available to you or to us has worked for us. So we've explored everything that we could do to get out of hotels and help a lot more people. And that has included our ability to mobilise citizens, if you see what I mean, which I'll talk about more in a minute. Next slide, please. So I really won't go into loads of detail about this. These slides will be sent out, no doubt, afterwards. There's detail about what we've done to get to the 280 hotel rooms to none, 8.7 million pounds worth of savings and all that stuff. The levers on the left-hand side are the important things. So we have, and I think Caroline, again, from Lancaster, the MP from Lancaster, talked about assembling all the housing. I suppose we've done that. I didn't think of calling it that. It was a really good way of putting it. We maximised the impact of all housing supply in the Royal Borough of Greenwich for the betterment of people living in the worst forms of temporary accommodation. There's some numbers as to how we did that. It did involve buying a lot of properties we weren't intending to buy. Then there's maximise the impact of our support initiatives, looking at prevention. Obviously, it has been difficult to get into the preventative space. I was talking at lunch with a couple of colleagues in the room about prevention and how it's just the obvious thing to do, isn't it? Prevention's better than cure, Chantal. Yeah. And I was trying to explain to Chantal, who actually was really willing and able to listen, very able to listen actually, how incredibly difficult it is to get into the preventative space at the moment. But we have done some of that stuff, but there's a long way to go on prevention. Minimising the unit cost of temporary accommodation. Whatever temporary accommodation we've got, what we use, we now know how much it costs per night across the entirety of the portfolio. So we can model exactly how much difference financially every intervention we're thinking about doing will have. And that's enabled me to encourage politicians to make some incredibly difficult decisions, which I might speak about a little bit more later, because they know the impact and it's been proven to be the case on various occasions. And then maximise the income we collect from TA, surprisingly neglected in the past, but now we are maximising the income we achieve from TA. That has involved increasing the rents on a lot of our TA units, but the benefit system has been able to cover that for those that are on full or partial benefit. And then the last slide, probably the best one for this audience, I hope anyway, is our actual move into the world of co-production. As it says on the slide, since about 2023, the leader of the council kind of introduced us to a local community interest company called Creating Ground, which is formed from migrant women. And their raison d'etre is to try and bring about a better situation in society for migrant women. And one of the things that migrant women are very badly trapped by is the homelessness system, unsurprisingly. So Creating Ground and us formed a pretty tight bond. And I can't go into everything, there's not the time to today, but really having listened throughout the day-to-day about the value of creative arts and thinking very differently to how we think as bureaucrats in local authorities who are statutory, is when you start thinking widely and creatively, you make an awful lot more difference for a lot of people, especially children. So Creating Ground worked with the example I'll use is Creating Ground worked with a local primary school called Plumcroft School, and they created this animation called the Snow Inn Hotel. And if anyone watches that and doesn't cry, I'll be amazed, especially in this room. I've watched it at least 3 times, and I have cried every single time. But the point being that 80 of my staff have seen this animation as one team, in a room a bit like this. Creating Ground showed 80 of my staff the animation, and then we sat down and did some action planning. So what should we do about this? And the way the staff reacted to the question, what should we do about it, was completely different to what it would have been had they not seen the animation. Sounds obvious, especially to a lot of people in this audience. It's not how local authorities work normally. Because of Creating Ground, we've introduced free Wi-Fi access to everyone that we were placing hotels and everyone we do place in nightly rate temporary accommodation. We've got about 1,000 units still of nightly rate temporary accommodation. There's a free SIM card scheme which became available because of the work we do Creating Ground. We've recently co-produced Your Guide to Temporary Accommodation, so it's a really easy read guide for families going into and living in temporary accommodation and wanting to move on from temporary accommodation. It's been co-produced with Creating Ground, with mums of children. There's a link to that in the slides, and we're incredibly proud of that because it's written by our homeless people. The children have asked for various things which we're working on. They would like wellbeing hampers. The things children tell you when you ask them, I mean, the children's commissioners were brilliant earlier. This is all new to me, all this stuff in the last few years. Children said, what we need is therapy. I didn't expect primary-aged school children to even know what therapy is. And I've got 3 children of my own, by the way. They're quite old now. They recognise the need for therapy and counselling and that kind of help for themselves, for other children going through this same thing, and their parents. So that's an ask they've made of us. They talk about transport and some stuff that's less surprising. One thing that's quite surprising is they recognise the need for better communication across services. I thought it was only us that realised that we don't talk to each other. They do. All sorts of other stuff. We're now moving on to working with Greenwich Citizens, which is part of the umbrella of Citizens UK, on their Fix the 5 Basics in TA campaign, as it's up there, cooking, laundry, Wi-Fi storage, clear information. Just wanted a bit to talk about the MHCLG side of things. They've invested £11 million in the Helping Families Living in Temporary Accommodation Fund up to March next year, which is absolutely fantastic. So I'm working with Creating Ground and millions of staff on what to spend that money on. And we're going to spend the money on what the children wanted us to spend it on, which wouldn't have happened before this programme started. And a bit of a proud moment that we were shortlisted and have been commended in the London Homelessness Awards this year. which I think was announced yesterday, and there's a lunch to celebrate that. So 4 people from Creating Ground and 4 people from the council will be going to that towards the end of November to celebrate being commended and getting a certificate off Dame Louise Casey. And I think that's about it from me.
Fantastic. Thank you, Shaun. So, yeah, go on. Round of applause. What's great to hear is that you recognise that there is the financial implications of the hotel use, which is bankrupting many councils around the country or at the verge of it. And it's having to be creative of how do you use your money best to do that, whilst also looking at the really small, from a council's point of view, of things like the therapy that the kids have asked for, which you could at one point just go, guys, we're trying to fix the big housing systems because we're the local authority and we're doing housing things. And if you go bankrupt, then there's all sorts of other implications from that. So it's finding the balance of going, what do we need to do for kids literally today and what do they need now, whilst also knowing, but if we don't sort out our funding models in the next 2 to 3 years, then we're going to be in a bit more of an issue. So yeah, it's just really encouraging to see that, and from the Fix the 5 Basics campaign as well. The extra money that's come through from the government has been launched on the back of the constant pushing from from different partners, from us, Just Life, Trust for London, the Fix the 5 Basics campaign, and others who have been involved in that. And it's great to see that the government actually put the money where the mouth is and going, okay, if you want practical things for children, TA, here's 11 million quid. Now, we did work out for all the 61 councils and all the homeless kids that are represented by them, that's £9.50 per child. Now, I know that's not how the money is spread out, and it's a one-off and it's a non-recurring. So for the budget holders, it's kind of going, that's great, but what about for the next 2 to 3 years? So, but anyway, we're at the start of a longer conversation with the government on this. Rachel, can you give us a bit of a outline of where Salford's at? What's the lay of the land? What challenges do you have? How are your staff? Are they all right?
They're getting there. So I'm Rachel Connelly, I'm Head of Supported Housing with Salford City Council. So I've got responsibilities around our statutory temporary accommodation and our sleeper services and our immigration programmes like Homes for Ukraine. So Salford's in a very similar position. And people, if you're not local, Salford's the next city along from Manchester. And
the greatest city out of the two.
Is that?
The greatest city out of the two.
I like to think so. And we're part of the 10 local authority collectives that are Greater Manchester through the Combined Authority led by Andy Burnham. So a very, very similar position to Greenwich in terms of the challenges that we've faced and the solutions that we've kind of come up with. So it's kind of good to see that, well, A, misery likes company, and B, we're on the same page in terms of what we think we need to do to try and address some of these issues. I don't have the benefit of slides, I'm afraid, given the very short notice. But we've got 850 households in statutory temporary accommodation currently, and about 70% of those are families with dependent children within them. That equates to 1,300 children who are the responsibility of Salford and in temporary accommodation, although one of our greatest challenges at the minute is that a significant proportion and way too many of those families and children are living outside of our borough, so we've got additional pressures in terms of the availability and the cost of temporary accommodation available to us within our own city. So we have got families placed outside of Salford, and that's our key challenge for this year, is to make sure that those families that originate from Salford, whose support networks are in Salford, whose education is in Salford, reside in temporary accommodation in Salford. And as an authority, our responsibilities is to prevent homelessness where at all possible, so that people don't come into temporary accommodation. My responsibility then, if somebody does come into temporary accommodation, is to make that experience as good as it can be, and then to make it as short a period of time as is possible and get people moved into settled accommodation as quickly as we can. In Salford, we're in a position where we don't have significant amounts of people in B&B style accommodation. We don't have any shared kind of temp accommodation arrangements for families. We have some short stays in bed and breakfast for people, but the majority of our temp accommodation provision for families is in dispersed properties. So we've got a large number of flats and houses of different sizes across Salford and in Greater Manchester. So whilst one of our issues is that we've got people located outside of the city, pretty much exclusively all those families are in Greater Manchester, so they're not at significant distance from Salford. Clearly too far away from Salford if they're not within Salford and want to be in Salford. But we are maintaining those placements in Greater Manchester. So the vast majority of people that we're supporting through temp accommodation aren't necessarily in those kind of experiences that you've heard this morning. They are in kind of regular properties across different communities, anonymous properties, so generally those accommodations aren't necessarily known to the wider community that they're a temp accommodation. People will see that might be the situation, but generally they're just general needs accommodation. Unfortunately, as much as one of those responsibilities is to try and get people out as quickly as possible, it's quite often about 2 years that somebody will be in our temp accommodation for. We're working really hard to try and change that, but the biggest challenge for us is a lack of social housing and a lack of affordable private sector accommodation. So they're the challenges that we're facing to try and get affordable accommodation for people to move into. Heard a lot of stuff today about people having multiple moves around accommodation, and again, we don't tend to do that too much. Because we've got quite a fixed portfolio of accommodation, there might be a couple of moves around those bed and breakfast style arrangements. If you're using commercial hotels, they're notorious for you can get them on the Wednesday and Thursday, and you can have them back on the Monday, but Friday, Saturday, Sunday, when, Coldplay are playing or Oasis are in town, the football's on, then we don't have access to those rooms, so that can cause some disruption for people. But generally, when people leave that bed and breakfast style accommodation and move into a dispersed property, as long as their circumstances don't change and it's reasonable and appropriate for them to be there, we don't make those multiple moves. And as a local authority employee, I'd kind of like to give people some comfort in. We hear what's said this morning from people's lived experience, and I hold us accountable for our response to those comments that have been made. And I've got a colleague with me from our City Mayor's office who is taking note of all the challenges that have been expressed today around the transport costs, around the white goods and the furnishings when people move on. And she's going to list all of those challenges and then pass them back to me to make sure that I've got an adequate response to each of those challenges, and where I haven't, that we develop one and we talk to our customers about what that would look like best for them. Every household in our temporary accommodation also has that wraparound support that was talked about. So everybody gets an allocated support officer while they're in our temp accommodation. And whilst I'm kind of proud to say that, I also recognise that historically, when our numbers were far less and I had pretty much the same staffing team to deliver that support, we could do it far better than we do it now. It's so diluted now because there's a need to spread that same resource across so many more households. We've probably had a similar kind of 7-fold increase in the last 7 years. And again, whilst we used to be able to support people once they'd left that temp accommodation and they'd moved into settled housing, we could carry on supporting for maybe 6 months, help things get set up in the new property, help them get established in a new community, do some aspirational stuff around either getting into employment or increasing employment opportunities. The demand is such now that as somebody moves into new accommodation, we're needed to support the family that's following behind them into that temp accommodation. So we don't get to do that level of support to the level that they need us to do it. The impact of that is potentially repeat homelessness of people coming back through the system, and that's not a position that we want to be in. And what we're hoping is that we're doing similar work around prevention. And if we can reduce our costs and redistribute our resources better, we can prevent homelessness and use the resources that we've got to better and longer support the families that we can't avoid that crisis for, but that we support them better going forward. We're one of the authorities that have had some of this funding from central government around improving the experiences of children and young people in temp accommodation. So ours is not quite as bleak as the £9 thing. So our figure is 125,000 for the year, and that with 1,300 children in temp accommodation is going to work out about £100. So it's not quite as bleak as that, but it's it's not the be all and end all of everything. It's not going to make massive differences. And we've kind of got together as a group of professionals to think about what we could spend that on, and we've equally done some consultation with people who are currently in our temp accommodation. And some of the things that we're looking to provide are kind of data packages so that people have got access to the internet in the accommodation that they're in. We've had requests around things like brownies and football subs, gym passes for older children. We've got, within the city, we've got a decent holiday initiative for children to access out-school activities in the holidays, but if you're placed outside of the borough, that makes it more difficult. So we've got funding available to families if they can source, or we can help them source a holiday club more locally. We've been asked for things like children-focused bedding, so that rather than the kind of fairly boring grey bedding that we get to make it gender neutral and inoffensive to anybody, that just comes from Asda. We can now get Lightning McQueen or Peppa Pig or whatever, something that just makes it a little bit more in line with what that child needs. Night lights have been asked for to give a feeling of security and accommodation. We already do provide transport costs, so we provide if we placed a family at a less manageable journey to school than they had previously. So it's not always about distance. So there's potentially you can live closer, but it's a more difficult journey. You could live further away, and it's not quite so difficult. So we take it on a case-by-case arrangement, but we'll provide bus passes for children and their accompanying carer whilst they're in our temporary accommodation to make sure that we can get young people to school. So there are ideas around what we'll spend the additional funding on, and as things develop with our families, we'll be open to take on board any other requests, take things on a case-by-case arrangement, but we're open to ideas. If other colleagues from other authorities have got ideas about what they're doing, we're always interested to know how we can do things better.
Perfect, thank you. So you two are spinning a lot of plates. There's a lot of negotiation, I guess, with different departments as well. As you're saying, there's a lot of silos within your own council, the different departments, to get them around the table. What about people who aren't part of the council in terms of health, education, the voluntary sector, people with experience? Like, is there a plan or a strategy, or are you trying to, how do you break down those silos in between other organisations or either publicly funded departments that are we're all here to do the same job, to support the children through their homeless journey, but we're all very good at working in our own silos as well. So how do you break down those? So what you're working on at the moment?
Yeah, it's a really great question. So one example of that is, I suppose, from the children's safeguarding point of view. So I'm on the Children's Safeguarding Partnership Board, and there's a quality assurance subgroup sort of set up beneath that, so they pick certain themes to do sort of task and finish pieces of work on. And one of the things that they chose to do a task and finish piece of work on was we've heard today about the notification situation. So in London there used to be a system after a child died in temporary accommodation in Haringey in the early 2000s. A system was created called Notify, which was a way of homelessness authorities notifying schools, notifying children's services of the movement of children across London boroughs, which is incredibly frequent. And that system was fairly well adopted by the vast majority of London authorities. How well it was ever used, it was always a bit of a moot point. It depended which authority you worked for and whether they took it very seriously or not seriously, and so on. Unfortunately, in recent times, Notify has withered on the vine, has actually been withdrawn this year. It no longer exists in London. So our Children's Safeguarding Partnership Board, because I update them on this sort of thing if they don't hear about it from other places, we've done a piece of work, a bit of a task and finish piece of work as to what we can do as Greenwich to kind of fill that gap as best we can. But it's very difficult to replicate that without investing an enormous amount of money in IT and so on. So we're working that through, and we are making some good progress and prioritising the most vulnerable children to make sure that the schools are informed, that the parents are homeless and so on and so forth, and when they're moved, the schools are informed, and we help, obviously, the children if they need to be moved to another school and so on. But there's a huge amount of complexity involved in the whole GP thing. So, informing GPs that somebody is homeless and something actually happening as a result of that is actually really, really deeply complex. So I suppose it's an example of something where it's been identified, we're doing work on it, but it is actually only work in progress. But I guess just by working really closely with colleagues in children's services, in health, in public health, etc., and having leaders from the homelessness service doing that work, you do need your leaders to do that work for you. So it's not a particularly brilliant example of something amazing we've done and finished and so on, but I think we are involved in a lot of conversations of that nature. And at the moment, because of things like the £250,000 that we get from the 11 million, it kind of opens doors, because all of a sudden children's services are interested in that £250,000. You don't even need to go and talk to them about it, they've already come to you. And you say, yeah, we can start paying. We don't pay, as a borough, we don't pay for almost any children to get any travel when they live outside of the borough. We just don't. We're in a really bad position on that. All of a sudden, we're going to be able to do some of that, and we will do that and make sure we're not duplicating money that's being spent elsewhere, that our priorities align with the priorities of children's services and public health and so on and so forth. So, yeah, it's just about being networked up and having a proper approach to homelessness which does not see any barriers. And I think we've kind of got that in Greenwich. We're definitely not perfect on it. So, that's
and things can be work in progress, and that's fine. So thank you for working that. There's a couple of GPs in the room, so if you want any advice of how to work with them, I'm sure we could put you up there. Yeah. Rich?
So an example in Salford. So my initial responsibilities was around providing statutory temporary accommodation where there's a housing duty, so where there's been an assessment under the Housing Act. And what we established was that when that Housing Act responsibility and duty was discharged, then the family could still be homeless. It wasn't necessarily discharged on the basis of somebody moving into settled accommodation. Could have been an issue around intentionality or eligibility or not accepting a suitable offer. And in those circumstances, historically, the family would become the responsibility of Children's Services under the Children's Act responsibilities and would leave our accommodation, move to alternative accommodation, sourced and funded and managed by the Children's Services Department. And it was another level of disruption to that household. So we've changed things around in collaboration with our Children's Services Department so that where the duty changes, doesn't necessarily mean that the accommodation is going to change. So we now, as a department, deliver the Children's Act responsibilities in terms of temp accommodation on behalf of Children's Services, which provides some additional stabilities for that family so that they can stay in that accommodation just under a different duty but by the same authority. So we've reduced some of that disruption to families. We're also doing the notifications to schools. We've been doing that for about 12 months now, and that's going quite well. And we're about to launch in January with notifications to GPs. We're just working through, like you say, some of those additional complexities around the health services. But yeah, we feel our children are better supported now. They're getting that pastoral care and that acknowledgement through the education department that would have always been there. Our school colleagues just didn't necessarily know that was going on for that family. So with consent, we're sharing those details to schools so they can better support.
Thank you. We've got time for a couple of kind questions. So anybody wants to ask one, please shuffle your way down. Come on down to the microphone and we'll all awkwardly watch you in silence. Who's first? Vicky? Go on.
I would just like to know what you think the role of schools is within all this, because we've talked a lot about putting children at the heart of this. We've got stretched children's services, very stretched mental health services, lack of SEND services, but as schools we are seeing these children every single day, or not, as the case may be, if they move too far out of Borough and they haven't got the bus fare to get to school. And I think schools are in a good position because we know our families. We provide a lot of support. Sometimes we're providing washing and cooking facilities for families, for example, if they're in hotel accommodation. We're helping them with bus fares and things like that. but we're also in a position to maybe do some preventative work because we know these families, we've got a good relationship. So I'm just thinking about the additional funding that's coming as well. Schools are massively stretched, support staff are being taken away from schools, but we're trying to do it because we can't not, because that child turns up, they're in front of us. If you're like another service and they're on a waiting list, you might not see them for 18 months, but we see them every day. So I'm just wondering what you think the role for schools is and how local authorities could support schools to do some of this work. How could we join up that work a bit closer?
There's a ripple of applause.
I bumped into you in the queue at lunch, didn't I?
Yeah.
So I'll just go straight for something from the past, actually, in a way. Schools do it a hell of a lot already. And I do think, as has been said earlier, we can't just keep asking schools to do more and more and more and more. But the relationship schools have with the parents, the relationship that schools have with the children is actually something that we can't replicate in a homelessness service. We just can't do it. So it's about maximising the benefits that derive from those different types of relationships. So what I'm going to go to is back to the year probably 1999, 2000, maybe a little bit later than that, last time that there was a homelessness crisis, and the whole sector, there was about 100,000 households in TA in 2003, and the government said halve it by 2010. And all of a sudden we became incredibly creative and innovative as a sector, as a country. And one of the things that my neighbouring borough, I worked at Barnet Council at that time, Harrow Council, invented a homelessness education pack. And it was literally a pack that went onto the curriculum in the schools in the borough of Harrow, where staff went in from Harrow Council and gave a lesson in homelessness. Now, the reason being was they went to schools where there was a very high prevalence of homelessness in those school communities. The point being that children would then have different conversations with their teachers, different conversations with their parents. The teachers would be picking up on things that otherwise they wouldn't have been picking up on, and then knowing who to contact in the local authority. The point being it was a preventative action, it was a preventative thing. So it doesn't exist anymore. Barnet Council was where I worked. We stole the idea. I had my housing advisor graduate trainees go and deliver the lesson in Barnet schools, and we saw huge amounts of increases in prevention going on, and early notifications and early warnings and so on and so forth. So in terms of the £250,000 that Greenwich has got, I'm looking at whether we could resurrect that in partnership with the schools. So Vicky Cuff is the AD for schools, it's not a job title, in Greenwich, but me and Vicky, we're pretty close, and we're talking about doing exactly that sort of thing. But if it isn't homeless education packs, what else can be done? And I really see it as an early intervention role, but I also see it as a real early warning signs role. So the child that's coming in, okay, I'll tell you some things I've picked up on through these relationships. Children who don't know how to use a toilet, and then that is demonstrated in the school because they've been living in hotels, they've been living in HMOs, they're scared to go to the toilet, they found another way of relieving themselves. I wouldn't hear this stuff working in homelessness, I've heard it from schools. So the schools know when a child is struggling in a way we never will. Schools need to know to come to me or whoever it is in my service and point these things out, and then we need to go and help. So it's early warning signs, it's early prevention, it's early notifications. It's kind of, we're all there. The child is at the centre of what we're doing. That'd be my. There's loads of stuff I could go into, but yeah, that's my idea there.
I don't think there's anything to add there, although interestingly, I used to deliver that programme in Salford. So we used to do the same thing, going into schools, and I'd go to year 10 citizenship classes and talk about homelessness, teenage pregnancy, immigration-related issues. So yeah, we've talked about resurrecting and that kind of thing again, but possibly we did it in year 10 when young people like 14, 15. But yeah, maybe we need to do that earlier on and kind of be a part of breaking down some of the stigma around not being in settled accommodation. Early notification through the system set up in each local authority to refer households in advance of the crisis happening if you're aware within families that there's a struggle. And yet I think the notification system has opened a dialogue between us and schools, and it gives schools somewhere they can see the email address that notification's come from. They know which part of the local authority, if they need some support around that household's housing situation to come to. Just keeping that two-way dialogue with us and doing what you are doing in a fantastic way to support those young people who are in vulnerable situations through the housing.
I think there's opportunity. Sorry, I'm really cheeky now. I think there's opportunities to engage with the families though as well, not just the children for education, because schools often know those parents. They're a safe space. Parents will come in and talk to schools. So I think there's opportunities there to kind of engage with families in that way, whereas you might not necessarily get them coming to a homeless service unless they're in absolute crisis. So there's a role somewhere for putting support into schools to have the advice, the knowledge, the expertise to support families, parents as they come to them, to be able to, there's little pockets to that, and we're trying to spread that out more, but again it's resources that are needed for schools to do that.
Yeah, so Creating Ground, who we're working with, who've done the animation with the children at Plumcross School, one of the things we're discussing with them is parent groups. So groups for the parents of who are in temporary accommodation, so the parents do have a space to come together, safe space to come together, but it won't be with council officers like me or my staff, it will be with Creating Ground. So I think you're absolutely right. We need to address every part of the family, and sometimes family therapy will be the right thing. And I've forgotten what children. So
I suppose what I say is with the data, we're trying to establish are there pockets of our communities where homelessness is more prevalent than in other areas. So then taking our services to the parts of the city where they're potentially most needed. So as we get better in looking at the data and establishing where we might need to do some additional community work, schools could well be a vital place for us to kind of go and take our services out and give people opportunity to come into a trusted environment to kind of seek our services.
Thank you. I just want to make sure that we have time to stretch our legs for coffee, and so I'm sure our panelists will be able to answer your question over coffee if that's okay. So we don't have time for it now, but go grab them later over a brew. Thank you so much for coming and speaking with us today, especially on such short notice, Rachel. Thank you, I appreciate it. You can have an extra slice of cake in the other room.